in the humdrum of life, I had forgotten the motorcycle. And on this trip, we felt we could have a motorcycle. So he got me a motorcycle for my birthday. And that was fun. I got back to riding. It felt very nice. I got into a group. Simultaneously at the workplace, I had been in HR for a very long time. And I just felt that the entrepreneurial world was shaping up, and I'd like to do something that I could call my own, that was distinctive and that gave me pleasure. And it was not because I just wanted to do a job. These things were happening in parallel. I was also going through my personal growth journey through Sumedha's, and I was exploring the question of what is the purpose of your life? That question that, unlike Karna in Mahabharata, so it is believed that Karna was different from Arjun in Mahabharata because Karna got caught up with his own, victimhood of saying that, bad had been done to him. So we don't know how much life we have. And everything must happen in parallel. And I don't think we can wait to give back to society only after we have retired.
Not everything that matters needs to be loud. Some conversations help you pause, some help you see differently, and some stay with you long after they end. Welcome to Inspire Someone Today, my dear listeners, a space for honest conversations about life, work, and the choices that shape who we become. No quick fixes, no borrowed certainty, just real stories, thoughtful reflection, and the quiet courage to live with intention. This is Inspire Someone Today, where conversations are human, reflective, and meant to stay with you. Change doesn't always arrive as disruption. Sometimes it arrives as responsibility. In this episode of Inspire Someone Today, we meet Bhavna Issa, someone who crossed worlds not for reinvention, but because a problem refused to be ignored. From the certainty of the corporate world to the ambiguity of the social sector, from the freedom of the open road to the responsibility of caregiving, from individual agency to collective preparedness. This is not a story of sacrifice, it's a story of ownership. As part of our Changemaker series, this conversation explores what happens when people stop asking why this happened to me and start asking what now. No pity, no heroics, just a humane, grounded conversation about care, courage, and designing for the future that's coming for all of us. Care. Let the conversation begin. Bhavna, it's an absolute joy to have you on this episode of Inspire Someone Today.
I got a little emotional while listening to the introduction. Thank you. It's a very nice perspective, and I'm very grateful that you look at it like that.
Thank you. Thanks for giving us time and willing to share your experiences of what have accomplished over the years. So first up, the chasm of the corporate world to the social sector. What started to feel incomplete for you in the corporate world for you to make the transition into the social sector?
2-3 things. I think it's different from how I saw it at that time and how I reflect on it now. I think I told myself a story. The story that I told myself at that time was that I have pursued this corporate ladder for a while, and what will give me true happiness? What is really the purpose of my life? I have spoken about this earlier, and I said, what would I really like to contribute to myself, to this world, to the life that I have been given? And today, when I look back, I think I was definitely bored of what I was doing. It seemed repetitive. It didn't seem to feed my soul. And it also felt like as if I was running out of time. My dad was 54 when he had passed. It was quite young. And I just felt that I didn't have probably the luxury of, knowing whether I will retire at some point. What if I never got that opportunity? So what do I really want to do with my life? Were a few things that were happening around the time. I also think that I had been a techie in my heart, so I wanted to do something around technology. And I definitely wanted to do something that felt was for a larger purpose than serving me and my bills. And that's what led me to figure out what I want to do. It didn't feel like a huge chasm, like you call it, but it's interesting that you call it that way.
But nevertheless, a very interesting pivot that you were wanting to make from the corporate world to the social sector. Was your dad's condition the only trigger for you to do that, or was there some other defining moment or a drift within that kind of nudged you to say that, okay, it's time for you to kind of go make bigger impact?
Wasn't like that. They were not, it was just very organic, Shrikant. I think I was around 39 when, on a trip to Goa, my husband and I, we thought, maybe we could have a motorcycle and we should get a motorcycle. I used to ride a scooter in my young days, and I used to have a motorcycle later. And, in the humdrum of life, I had forgotten the motorcycle. And on this trip, we felt that we could have a motorcycle. So he got me a motorcycle for my birthday. And that was fun. I got back to riding. It felt very nice. I got into a group. Simultaneously at the workplace, I had been in HR for a very long time. And I just felt that the entrepreneurial world was shaping up, and I'd like to do something that I could call my own, that was distinctive and that gave me pleasure. And it was not because I just wanted to do a job. These things were happening in parallel. I was also going through my personal growth journey through Sumedhas, and I was exploring the question of what is the purpose of your life? How do you want to live your life? How do you want to add meaning to yourself, etc.? And they seem to all organically grow into wanting to do a venture of my own, not necessarily a social venture. So then I thought about, what is it that will give me a sense of purpose? What is the purpose of my life? And that led me to think about saying, I would really get a lot of joy if I was able to go beyond myself. Also in the Sumedhas school, one of the questions was, what is your dharmic life? What is a dharmic life? And one of the definitions of leading a dharmic life is if you can go beyond your personal suffering and do something for the greater good. Interestingly, I also come from XLRI, and the tagline for XLRI is for the greater good. And all these things were not something that I was very aware of or very mindful and intentional, but they did seem to come together at that time. So I introspected a lot and thought about, what is the core of my life experience? And the most defining thing and the most significant thing that I felt at that time was the fact that my dad had a terminal illness, and that his illness had deeply impacted our family, and it had definitely impacted life choices that I had made, career choices that I had made, the kind of person that I had become. And I felt that I was not the only one who would have such a thing. There are many, many people who are impacted by illness like him. And what about such individuals. So that question, that unlike Karna in Mahabharata, so it is believed that Karna was different from Arjun in Mahabharata because Karna got caught up with his own, victimhood of saying that, bad had been done to him. If only Karna had gone beyond himself and been able to look at many other people who are, capable and competent, but they don't get the opportunity because they are not Kshatriyas, then he would have led a dharmic life. Made me think a lot. So I felt that I can't be caught with my experience. How can I take it beyond me? And then a friend of mine suggested that, why don't you raise money for this? And I thought, the best way to raise money for this would be a nonprofit. So without really understanding the social development sector in, like a professional, I decided to pursue it like that. And then I was quite particular that healthcare should be a nonprofit, because a nonprofit healthcare will drive a very different set of metrics. A profit-oriented healthcare organization will drive a very different target segment orientation, profit generation goals. And that was not what felt right to me at that time. And so I got into what was later called the social sector.
What a brilliant start that is, Bhavna. And you kind of brought about 3 or 4 different threads that we'll definitely talk through this conversation. Couple of things that you did mention about when you kind of go beyond the self. And this is a quintessential question that all of us has. What's the purpose of life, right?
Yeah.
And you did speak about boredom on one end, personal crisis the other end, love or passion for motorcycles, passion for giving back, right? In hindsight, when you look at all of these things, it might sense saying, okay, these are all the triggers that happened. But at that point of time, when you were going through all of these things, what was that sense that you had? How were you able to connect all of these dots and take that step forward?
I have tried to explore this question a few times. So, if, people look up my podcasts, and they will find there are commonalities, because after all, it's the same thing. But I'm going to try and see if I can, explore something else with you now that you're asking me this question. I think getting back to motorcycle riding gave me pleasure and a sense of independence and abandon like nothing else had given me for a very, very long time. There is something very liberating and powerful about being able to ride a motorcycle, even if it is a nice Royal Enfield 200 kilo motorcycle, the sense of invincibility, the sense of I have control, it is incredible. I totally recommend it to everyone, especially women. And I do think that it was very important for me to have a sense of control on my life, which otherwise I did not. So that, and the second, I think, was the sense of liberation. If I could fly, I'd fly, but I couldn't fly. So, riding a motorcycle was a nice close second. And it gave me a sense of freedom that was very, very empowering. And I felt I reclaimed a part of myself that had been forgotten in the humdrum of life. So I think that was step one. And then this whole question of what is a dharmic life, etc. And I the way that I framed my response to it was very grand and, it should be something that is for the this, that, and the other. It should give purpose to my life experience. It should be for the greater good and things like that. So it had become too grand. And I ended up joining a group of women motorcyclists in a group called the Bikerni, where I've discovered even more fun parts of myself, which I had forgotten. And, incredible women over there, all motorcyclists, all, breaking barriers in so many ways, led me to a trip that I made with 6 other women. We were 7 of us. And that experience reinforced that it's worth giving it a shot. Whatever your dream is, it's not very clear. And I was definitely influenced by a few people. Randy Pausch was one of them. And Randy Pausch is very popular. The Last Lecture definitely influenced me very, very deeply. And I said, oh, childhood dreams are worth chasing. And I made a long list of all the things that I want to do and I want to chase. And, having a venture of my own that gave me a sense of satisfaction was definitely one of them. And so it led to a few other things and then a few other things. And I didn't have a full plan originally, just took the next logical step and things started taking shape of their own.
So as you're kind of responding to this, I did pick up one phrase that you used, which you called it as breaking barriers. So in lot many ways, does that kind of sum up the kind of mindset that you had? And along the way, when you made this transition from corporate to following your passion or to the social sector, what is that one thing that you underestimated in this particular transition?
Definitely the kind of resources that I will need and the kind of ambition that I have. I think both of those things. So the two go hand in hand. I thought, okay, let me do what I can do. And how much resources would this need? I definitely underestimated that. Resources is not just financial resources. It is time, it is effort, it is the number of people who join you and so on and so forth. So I just thought, and then I also underestimated how much ambition I have. So I could have kept it like a small project, but for sure I have a lot more ambition than I know.
I can relate to that. And looking back now, what from the corporate world that still serves your purpose in the development sector that you've been working on? What are some of those skills or traits that still serves you well today?
Oh my God, execution, action orientation, knowing about goal setting and performance assessment are all very, very valuable skills that the corporate world introduced me to. Networking, also having a network, whether sometimes you like it or not, you end up knowing people, or I don't know whether networking can be attributed to the corporate world, but for sure, I think some kind of goal orientation, action orientation, execution, performance orientation are all very, very valuable skills and experience from the corporate world that I have to keep going back to.
And as you were making this change, as you made this particular transition, was there moments where you questioned, did I make the right choice?
All the time. I continue to do that even today. More so even today, Shrikant, it's like finding your path in a dark alley, right? It's like not knowing a clear path. Like, who are the people who have done something like this before me? I don't know. I don't have an example. And so self-doubt is a constant companion, not because of just this, but also because of the kind of person that I am. I do tend to look at all dimensions. I do tend to look at, question everything, especially myself. So yeah, self-doubt is a constant.
Mhm. So what's the difference between that self-doubt of today versus self-doubt of, say, 15 years back?
Great question. I think the self-doubt of 15 years back would have been a little like whether or not something like caregiver oriented organization is possible, whether something like this has a place in this world, and whether I'm the right person for it. But the self-doubt of today is whether I can last long enough for the kind of energy and the resources that an ambitious project like this requires.
In a corporate parlance, if you were to kind of say that, does this product meet the market requirements then versus the product is there, how can I scale it up? How can the product go globally?
Yeah, absolutely. So well said. I mean, whether or not such a, is there a product here? Is there a market here? Is there a segment here?
All of these, Bhavna, what kept you the hope? What were you hopeful of? Even though you felt that, okay, you had that self-doubt, you kind of didn't see what you saw in the corporate world. But heart in heart, what kept you going? What was that hope behind the mission?
So when I started off, it was never about winning something. It was just that this had to be done. And I was arrogant enough to believe that I'm the best person to do it. Or that, if not me, who will do this kind of a thing? But what gives me hope today is, there seem to be a large number of people wanting to do things in this area and adjacent areas. So the fact that many more people are joining in tells me that there is something here. We probably don't have the answer, and we probably all need to come together, or we probably need to figure out something. But it isn't as lonely as it was when I started off. When I started off and I would have conversations, even now, some people would say things like, what are you really trying to do and why? And this was pre-pandemic. So telling somebody pre-pandemic that, healthcare is a crisis and it's a bomb that's going to blow up in our faces sounded very dramatic. But post the pandemic and post everybody having a very visceral experience of caregiving, it has become so much easier to tell people to relate with that experience. I can immediately say that, the helplessness that you felt during the second wave of COVID, when people were scrambling for medical resources, that is what a family caregiver goes through even today. It has become so relatable. So, and now recently, in the last couple of years, elder care and aging has become a big concern. So while it is not the same as caregiving, but because elder care is very close to it, I think many, many more people are paying attention to it and trying to solve this problem. So the more of us who pay attention to this gives you hope that, something can come out of this.
It's a good one. And that's a good segue to the next segment of our conversation about Caregiver Sathi. Tell us a bit about what Caregiver Sathi is. How did you kind of come about with this particular idea?
Okay. So how did I come up with the idea? It goes back to the same question of what is the purpose of my life? And the core of my life experience was the fact that my very fit father, who was a pilot in the Air Force, had a very rare neurological condition called multiple system atrophy, which took a very long time to diagnose. And he was in his 40s at the time, and I was in my teens. And it impacted him for sure. It impacted our entire family. And it impacted us in a way, not just, physically, emotionally, financially, but also the kind of choices that we made and the kind of other consequences that we had. So many years later, as I reflected on my life, and I felt that, this seems to be a very core experience that I have. Initially, I wanted to do something around multiple system atrophy and, the condition that impacted him. And very soon I realized that I didn't have the knowledge or the skills to do anything around it because I wasn't my dad's primary caregiver. My mother was. And I was at best the caregiver to the caregiver. And if I kind of look back at my experience, I also felt that if I look at caregiving across multiple conditions, not just multiple system atrophy, whether it's cancer, whether it's mental illness, whether it's aging, whether it is any kind of long-term, terminal, or chronic condition, then patient care is usually taken care of by the family caregivers. But the caregiver has a very lonely journey. Now, at that time, also, when I started, or how Caregiver Saathi came about, for me, it was a way of honoring not just my dad, but my mom and my grandmother, who were the caregivers. My mom was the primary caregiver. And her loneliness and her struggle and her valor through the caregiving was something that I felt is something that I saw. That it was only many years later that in a conversation, my mother turned around and said, "You keep saying this is about me, but what about you? Don't you see yourself as a caregiver?" And it struck me how, I keep saying that caregivers are invisible and they don't see themselves. Here I was, even I had not seen myself. And as a young caregiver, as someone who was in her teens and early 20s, it was very difficult for me to talk about the circumstances at home or to talk to my friends or to even have many friends because it was so difficult to relate. So having a friend during difficult times was really something that I missed. And so much so that last week I was meeting my school friends and they went on talking about something about, going back to our 20s and going back to the life of abandon. And I told them, I said, I don't know, I would have never said this many years ago, but I certainly don't want to go back to those days, and I would have found it so hard to share it with you. Today I can say it because, I'm at a different stage and, it's not so overwhelming for me. But basically, that whole reflection of how can I bring my life experience, my academics, my professional expertise together to do something meaningful beyond myself led me to the idea of Caregiver Saathi. At that time, it was more around just life experience and professional experience of corporates. But over time, it has also become, an integration with technology because that was my first love. I would have been a techie if I had continued my first chosen career.
And look at you. And now you have that opportunity to embed technology in what you're doing. Let's pause here for a moment. You may have noticed one idea quietly settling in. Something that doesn't need an answer, just awareness. Inspire Someone Today has always been about conversations that stay with you beyond the episode. Sometimes they continue in reflection, sometimes in action, and sometimes in community. If you'd like to engage beyond the podcast, there is an IST community where these conversations are carried forward thoughtfully. And if you prefer your own quiet space, the book Inspire Someone Today gathers many of these ideas for slower reflection. Let's continue. And Bhavna, you made a very pertinent point, particularly in terms of caregiving. And in a lot of these new age set of challenges that we have is the absence of a protocol or a benchmark or a playbook of sorts, right? And you have very nicely coined this out, saying that love doesn't equal to preparedness, right?
It doesn't.
You might love somebody in the family, but that doesn't give you the skills, the ability to be prepared for an eventuality like this.
Yeah.
So how are you enabling the community, the society through Caregiver Saathi in this direction?
So one of the things that I really didn't want to be as I was growing up was my mother was an educator and a school teacher. And a lot of people told me that, a working woman being a teacher is a good idea. You can be a teacher or a professor. And if there was one career that I did not want to have coming from a family of academics was being a teacher. I wanted to be different. And there's nothing you can do about your DNA and stuff that's in your blood, right? This whole context is to tell you that learning certain skills is absolutely essential. So first, recognizing what are the skills that are required for caregiving and picking up those skills is absolutely essential. What we have done through Caregiver Saathi so far is create the awareness, education, and the possibility of picking up certain skills. There are some people who don't have the time or the luxury or the opportunity or the inclination to learn some of these skills, and that's fine. And, they can take a slightly different route. You can probably outsource caregiving and hire somebody to do it for you. But I personally feel that you cannot outsource all the caregiving that you have to do. So somehow the analogy of, you remember many years ago, there would be these guidebooks for taking exams.
Yep.
Yeah. So if you have a predetermined curriculum in which there will be standard questions, then you can simply follow the guidebook. There will be question answers and you can learn just about those question answers and do very well in the exam. But life is not predetermined questions. And therefore, it is really important to know the subject and to study the subject, like my mother used to say, not for the exam, but for the sake of knowledge and for the sake of your growth. So life is that exam. And you can't take a kunji or a guidebook and get past some of the curved balls life can throw. But I don't want to decide that for people. So at Caregiver Saathi, we have primarily given people education and skills, but we feel that people should make some of these choices. So sometimes they hire services. Although our main focus is to help people prepare themselves for caregiving.
Which is a good start. You don't walk into a dark room not knowing what it is. At least you have some tools, some frameworks on which you can build to your respective scenarios.
But sometimes you're not there. Or sometimes it is so intense that, you have to take expert help. So for example, if you are just not in that city, you're not in that country, then you will need somebody to help you. Or, you're dealing with something that is so intense like Alzheimer's, or you're dealing with schizophrenia, or something that is, very, very intense. In that case too, you will need expert help. And that's okay. And you will learn along the way.
You learn along the way. And Bhavna, in the work that you have carried, if you were to kind of give me So you have 4 mythbusters. What is the myth that families are carrying around caregiving?
Number one, women are better caregivers. Okay. That two, that it's something that you know, that you can do only if you have love. Okay. And that all it needs is an attitude and not a skill. These are all many, many myths that are there. Another one prevalent these days, that you can throw money at the problem. You can have all the money. You may want to buy all the services. You may have the best person you have hired, but you can still feel helpless and guilty and sad. You will have to learn how to navigate that. You will experience grief and loss and the tension of managing different parts of yourself. You know, there's a career-oriented part of you. There is a person who is also a parent, who's also a friend, who is also a citizen, who wants to do so much for himself or herself. And then there is also the daughter, the son, the caregiver, right? All these roles are pulling at each other and sometimes in very different directions. How will you outsource that?
And with this, is it also one is lack of not knowing what they don't know, and other is there some kind of an invisible burden that individuals are carrying that they're not able to kind of realize it for themselves or express it out?
Yeah. So linked to this is this, that, you know, we come from a land where everywhere there are social narratives that define us as people or as societies, right? We come from a land where stories of Shravan Kumar and Savitri and whoever else have shaped and groomed us. So there is an idea of what is ideal caregiving. And that's very troublesome because on many occasions, a large number of caregivers will, or family members will make a choice of going to the hospital or choosing very, very difficult treatments because they don't want to be the person who is leaving any stone unturned, who is not doing more than the best that they can, because that's your duty and that's what you should be doing. So there are many ideas around caregiving.
So a related segment, a related thought on aging, caregiving. We have seen some of the countries already down that path. As a country, as a nation, as a community, what do you recommend we do to prepare towards that eventuality? All of us are future caregivers in some shape and form. So how do we as a community prepare towards that?
Well, I think that caregiving has to be a skill that all of us need to learn. I think in the Scandinavian countries, I remember when I was a school-going girl, there were choices and home science was considered a very bad thing that only girls took. And I really admire the Scandinavian countries because from grade 7, both boys and girls are taught life skills and they are taught how to manage homes. And I think children should know how to manage homes. I wish I had learned that skill when I was that young. And being a full-grown adult, both for men and women, requires you to have life skills that includes running your home, cooking for yourself, cleaning your home, etc., rather than be dependent on someone else. Just as young girls must learn to also be financially independent, young boys need to know how, homes are built. Building a home is not just about learning how to cook and clean. It is about building a space for nurturance, for care, for affection, for a place where, you can have joyful relationships. So how are we shaping adults who have the skills to not just be employable and be, productive members of the society, but also are able to shape caring, compassionate homes, societies is a very important thing. And the earlier we start, the better it is. It's also true in Japan. So, for example, you may have seen many of this. Young children in Japan clean their schools themselves. They learn the dignity of labor. So I think it is also important that not just children, but young adults and older adults recognize that if you have to care for a patient who needs to be cleaned up, it's not a low-level job. One of my biggest pain points around caregiving is that cleaning a person is considered a low-level job. That's caste system. Cleaning somebody is as important as being able to intellectually conceptualize an idea. So all of us need to be able to pick up these skills. All of us need to be able to dignify these skills if somebody else is doing them. And all of us need to be able to recognize that different age groups bring in different value to society. The older people bring a very distinct value to society. There is no fun in putting them in assisted living facilities and segregating them from the rest of the society. There is years of wisdom. There is, a certain irreverence towards life. There is a certain, knowing that life goes in cycles and circles that young children can benefit from, right? So I would definitely invest in some of these things in the longer sustainability at building skills, building sensitivity, as well as appreciating that it's not just the able-bodied young person who is valuable to a society, but the vulnerable, whether it is the children or the weak or the persons with challenges or the aging, are equally important because they bring in a sense of compassion. And as a society, we need compassion as a glue to hold our humanity together.
These are all wonderful thoughts and a segmented set of things. It's just not about caregiving. It's about aging. It's about aging in a dignified way. It's about having the skills. It's about being prepared. I think you touched upon a whole lot of topics that is very relevant, just not for somebody who's going through, but for everybody to prepare as families, as communities, as countries. If I were to kind of round all of this up and ask you a question, if somebody is listening to this podcast, say a 30-year-old, what's one message that you would give them in terms of aging?
How can I give somebody any message? But I would just say this, that, it is both a good thing to know that you have a limited life, but to live in an unlimited way. I think knowing that I don't know if I will cross 54 and I must do something now was very interesting in driving certain goals for me. So we don't know how much life we have, and everything must happen in parallel. And I don't think we can wait to give back to society only after we have retired, for example. So while you're working on your career, while you're working on your relationships, while you're working on your friendships, simultaneously, please figure out how you're contributing to society at the age of 20. I believe not just 30. Anybody who is an adult should be contributing to their homes and society simultaneously while shaping your skills, your competencies, your career, your relationships, everything. So it has to be a balance along the way. I think having goals is very, very, very useful. Now, when I look back, I wish I had made some goals. So I would say that seeing that, in my 20s, I would like to achieve this. In my 30s, I would like to do this. None of us knows how long we are going to be there. But for sure, defining those goals and being able to look back and say, oh, you know what? This is what I wanted to get done in 2025, but it has not happened. But now that I'm at the cusp of 2026, I know that at least I have to try very differently to make 2026 happen. But if I didn't have that goal, it would be so much harder. So I would therefore think that life is limited, but I would still live in a way that I was taking care of my physical health, my mental health, and know that, my God, I might live up to 100.
Well, that's a great call out. Is while you can be at any stage of your life and career, you want to pursue whatever you want to pursue, make giving back to the community as one of those elements. And that need not necessarily start when you retire. It has to be embedded as part and parcel of your growing phase.
Yeah. And I think acquiring new skills should be a part of every year's goals. And those skills should not just be work related. So, for example, learn a new language, learn a hobby, go to a new location, all those have a new set of experiences should be a part of, every year's goals.
I'll change gears here, literally and figuratively, going back to your biking expeditions, Bhavna. One question I have for you, bringing your riding analogy here is, how did riding prepare you for caregiving's paradox of slowing down?
Riding is not just fast. I'm not in racing. I'm in riding. Riding is also cruising. Being a long distance rider requires you to navigate twists and turns, falling down, getting back up, not worrying about hurting, gearing up. You don't go for long rides without your, knee guards and your elbow guards and your helmet. So preparing yourself, not being afraid of falling down. And if you fell down, asking for help.
Lovely. So those are the parallels that you can draw between riding and caregiving.
Yes, and being gracious enough to not just take help, but know that it's a long ride. Sometime I will take help and sometime I will give help. Right? So any long ride, let's say if you're doing a solo ride, you prepare for it a little bit, but you can't prepare for it altogether because you can get lost. So you prepare for it a little bit and then but you do take on the adventure. So it's like an adventure. And you can hurt yourself and you seek help and you give help. And if you're going out in groups of people, I've had a friend of mine, because I got lost and we were, 4 of us riding together. The 3 of them waited for an hour until I found my way back. And I told them that, I could have found my way back and I could have gone home. And they said, no, that's not what we do when we ride together. So a sense of sisterhood, a sense of camaraderie are so many things that riding has taught me. So I don't see them as very different, which is why probably I took a little while to understand your question.
So you don't see paradox, but you see parallels is what you're saying.
That's true. Well said.
And has a moment on road changed how you lead off the road?
Absolutely. Many incidents. So like I was telling you, on my ride to Mana Pass, this is an incident I've spoken about a lot. I fell down and I was above the tree line. My friends were not with me. They were much ahead, 3 of them much ahead and 3 much behind. And there was nothing I could do. I was just gasping for breath with a 200-kilo bike on top of me and not knowing what I could do. So I just waited till I would have the energy to get back on. And then after some time, some help came. And I got back on the ride. And there was no road over there. And then there's no road. You imagine there is no road. There are just rocks, boulders. How do you navigate a very heavy bike? It can't be very slow and it can't be very fast. So it's a continuous calibration, recalibration dance between you, the machine, the body, the road. So there are so many, many things that I have learned from riding that I think I apply. And I think off-road riding is much more fun. Off-road riding is adventure. Riding already laid path is not as much fun.
Break the barriers.
Break the barriers.
Wonderful. So, Bhavna, if I were to ask you, what is that one insight, yours, not the bike journey, your life journey so far? So, sitting here, end of 2025, if there is one insight your journey has clarified you about, what would that be?
Every story matters. And how much ever intense the story is, it's good to find some humor in it.
Nice.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thanks for that insight. Bhavna, what we do on this show is with every episode, we give 1 or 2 micro experiments for our listeners to go and try out for that particular week. If there's 1 or 2 micro experiments that you would want the listeners to kind of try it out, what would those micro experiments be?
Ride a bike.
A 200 kg Enfield?
Ride any bike. Ride a
Ride any
bicycle
bike.
for all I can. Try something new is what I would say that you haven't. List your childhood dreams. It's never too late to chase them. It doesn't matter how long that list is. My list still has another 30 more to go.
Cool.
For sure, I would say indulge in poetry.
That's an interesting take.
Yeah. I think poetry is a very beautiful expression of your experience. I love poetry in any language, particularly in Urdu or Hindustani. And I think poetry is a great way of expressing your emotions. And if we don't write, we should certainly read poetry, because poetry is the beauty of life. And I think it is really important for us to cherish the beauty of life and the gift of life. So all the loss and grief and the challenges notwithstanding, life is beautiful. If we can find ways of experimenting and celebrating, then for sure we should do that.
I think that's been a consistent theme all through our conversation, Bhavna, which is celebrate life and prepare for life. So thank you so much for sharing your wonderful story, for sharing what it means for the country, for the community to kind of get ready for caregiving, and what it means for each of us to develop a life skill and be prepared towards that. On that note, Bhavna, thank you so much for your time and your experience sharing. It's been one heck of a conversation. Appreciate that. Thank you for spending this time with us. Conversations like this remind us that growth doesn't always come from answers. It often comes from better questions. Inspire Someone today began with the belief that each of us has the power to make a difference. Not through grand gestures, but through everyday choices. That belief still holds, now with a little more depth and a lot more listening. If something from today's episode stayed with you, carry it forward, share it, sit with it, or explore it further through the IST community or the book Inspire Someone Today. Until we meet again, Stay curious, keep inspiring, and inspire someone today.